Hello BookTube. This is the I love the book, I love the movie tag. This tag was originally created by Game of Authors, who is a new booktuber, and this was his first video. I first learned about this tag and was tagged by Steve Donahue, so I will link both their videos down below. So for this tag, I am going to name the 10 books and their film adaptations I love. This will be in no particular order. So I will start with Dune. For those who don't know, Dune by Frank Herbert is the story of Paul Atreides, who is the scion of one of the great noble houses of the universe, and when his family is betrayed, goes out into the desert, foments a successful rebellion, and overthrows the universal empire of which he was a prominent member of previously. Now, when I say Dune and adaptations, most people would think the 1984 version by David Lynch. At least I think it was 1984. I'm not. I'm talking about the sci-fi miniseries from 2000, starring Alec Newman as Paul Atreides, John Hurt as Duke Leto, Ian McNeice as Baron Harkonnen, and Matthew Keeslar as Feyd-Rautha, with Saskia Reeves as Lady Jessica, Barbara Kudetova as Chani, and Julie Cox as Irulan, and of course Giancarlo Giannini as Emperor Shaddam IV. I love this version. It is just, the costuming is just what you would think they would wear. It's an amazing adaptation. Far better, I think, than the 1984 version. I'm not. I mean, of course, there's like an adaptation coming out next year, starring Timothée Chalamet, which I'm interested in. I'll wait for it to come out either on streaming or on home DVD, because I don't go watch movies. I don't. So, Dune. The next will be The Lord of the Rings, as Steve Donahue talked about in his video. For those who don't know, which I would be shocked, is The Lord of the Rings is about a quest to destroy the One Ring, which is the source of the Dark Lord Sauron's power, who is seeking to conquer all of Middle-earth. The book is a foundational piece of fantasy literature. I mean, all fantasy after Tolkien, after The Lord of the Rings, owes something to Tolkien, either influence or, influence can, either positive or negative. Like, you either, influence in that sort of drawing inspiration from, or kind of a reaction against. And the film version is spectacular. So number 7, well, I guess number 3, since I'm not doing this in any order, it should be 3, will be From Russia with Love. This is the second Bond film and the middle of the Bond novel series, written by Ian Fleming. So in the book, after a string of agents have been assassinated by James Bond, among them Le Chiffre, Mr. Big, Hugo Drax. Smersh is not terribly happy with Mr. Bond and want revenge in such a way as to humiliate him and ruin the reputation of his organization, MI6. To do this, they dangle a piece of cryptographic equipment they've developed in the book called the Spectre, in the film The Lecter, and tie that to a young agent, Tatiana Romanova, who will claim that she is in love with Bond, and that the only way for her to give him the Spectre Lecter is for him to come to Istanbul and take her in the Lecter, or facilitate her defection. So the idea is that during the return trip from Istanbul on the Orient Express, they will both be killed in what would appear to be murder-suicide, and thereby humiliating him and his organization. In the film version, Smersh is replaced, as they often are in these early films, by Spectre. And Spectre's plot is largely similar, although they only have one agent they want revenge for and not three. And they want the Lecter themselves. So basically their plan is use Bond to get the Lecter for them, steal it from him, humiliate him, and then sell it back to the Russians. Or I guess they might also approach the British, but I mean, clearly in the film they're going to sell it back to the Russians. And probably throw in Rosa Klebb as a sweetener. Would not have surprised me none at all. But anyway, so I really, really love the book version. How Fleming structures it. He starts the novel off from the villain's point of view and sets out how they set up the plan. And then introduce James Bond towards the much later in the book as the trap is sprung. And the film is widely regarded, I think, as probably the best Bond film. So, number 4 is A Pocketful of Rye by Agatha Christie. I've mentioned before that A Pocketful of Rye is my sentimental favorite amongst the Miss Marple novels. Largely because of this, the adaptation starring Joan Hickson from the mid-late 80s. I first watched it probably in condensed form on A&E's Miss Marple. So if I'm not mistaken, the films, obviously the Joan Hickson Miss Marple series is a series of televised films. And they were rebroadcast, much like the David Suchet Hercule Poirot novels, David Suchet led Hercule Poirot series, and then the later Miss Marple series, or Marple series. Like they would air in the UK, and then they would be rebroadcast on PBS through their mystery series. And then I want to say the Poirot and Miss Marple series would then be rebroadcast on the A&E channel, when A&E was a bit more arts and culture than what it is now. And I love this adaptation. Selina Cattle as Mary Dove is amazing. Joan Hickson, as usual, is phenomenal. Yeah, just amazing. So, for those who don't know the basic gist of uh, Pocketful Abroad, a wealthy investment banker, Rex Fortescue, is murdered. Subsequently, his wife and one of his maids are murdered. And the murders follow the pattern set by a famous nursery rhyme. I want to say the nursery rhyme's name called A Pocketful of Rye too. To generally to obfuscate what's actually going on. Miss Marple comes into this because she trained the murdered maid. One of Miss Marple's, I guess it's one of her charitable activities is she would take in young women from a local orphanage and she would train them for domestic service. Although, since this would be in the late middle or early middle 20th century, exactly how useful training for domestic service is a bit questionable, but anyway. So number 5, keeping up with Agatha Christie adaptations, would be Evil Under the Sun. This version would be the 80s film adaptation starring Peter Ustinov and Maggie Smith and Diana Rigg. So in the book, Hercule Poirot is on vacation to an island off the coast of Britain. In the film, it's a Mediterranean island. In both adaptations, a caustic actress in an unhappy marriage finds herself murdered. And Poirot, since he's on the scene, naturally does what he does and investigates the murder and eventually solves it. Number 6 is Titus Andronicus. I first encountered Julie Taymor's version of Titus in, I want to say shortly after it would have aired on the cable movie channels. And I fell in love with it. And I eventually read the play, and I've seen the film several times. I actually owned it at one point when I had more movies than I have now, and I love that film. It's just so over the top hilarious. So number 7, Richard III. Now in this case, I'm going to go for 2 movies because I love both the Laurence Olivier version from the late 50s or early 60s, and I love the version with Ian McKellen from the mid 1990s. It's just McKellen's rendition of that first speech by Richard is amazing. So number 8, I will go with Tennessee Williams' Sweet Bird of Youth. Now, I've never seen the play performed. I have read, much as I've read like the Shakespeare in book form. So Sweet Bird of Youth is about an aging hustler who's taken up with, or I guess it would be gigolo, would be more appropriate than hustler. So an aging gigolo who's taken up with a declining actress, and basically he's taken up with her and he's brought her back to his hometown where he wants to reconnect with a young woman he was in love with before he fled the town. Unfortunately for him, her father is a local political boss, and he would like a little bit of revenge for what he did to his daughter. And both versions, the play and the film, are amazing. So number 9, keeping up with Tennessee Williams, would be Cat on a Hot Tin Roof. It's a story of a very dysfunctional, wealthy family and the contest over who will eventually inherit the patriarch's wealth. And it is just amazing. I mean, both the film and the novel play. And finally, I will go with No Country for Old Men. I actually rather, I mean, Cormac McCarthy's not necessarily the best writer, and I think you can see that in The Road, which I cannot stand, either the book novel or the film adaptation. But I actually rather like the film and novel version of No Country for Old Men. It's just the story of Llewellyn Moss, who, while hunting, comes across the remains of a drug deal gone bad. He steals several $100,000 or $1 million from the scene, and subsequently goes on the run from a hired hitman called Anton Chigurh. And the local sheriff, whose name I'm currently blanking on, goes in pursuit to try to save Llewellyn's life and bring Chigurh to justice, and ultimately fails. And so, yeah, I really love both of those films, the film and the book. So that was the Love the Book, Love the Movie tag. Thank you, BookTube. See you later.